Welcome to the Gita in Action podcast. My name is Radha Priti, and I am your host, along with this wonderful group of seekers that I have here with me this morning. Thank you all for being here this morning. We have some new faces, and I'm so excited to hear from you and be here with you guys. What we do here is we read through the Gita. We're in chapter 2 right now, and we talk about its relevance to our lives. And the seekers that are here with us live, while we're reading through, if you guys have any realizations or shares or any way that you can relate to the text and you want to share, we just put our hands up and then we all share together, and it's really wonderful collaborative experience. So thank you all for being here and for sharing. And it's so fun throughout the week as I'm talking to different people. They say, "Oh, I really love what Kelly shared about such and such," or it's so nice to hear how like all the little different pieces touch different people. And it's kind of like this quilt that we're making together. So I love that. And today we are going to start chapter 2, text 64. So I'll reframe where we are again. Arjuna asked this question to Krishna about how a perfected yogi restrains his senses, engages his senses, navigates through life's ups and downs, and what their key characteristics are. This 4-part question Arjuna asked to Krishna, and this was back 10 texts ago. This was in text 254. He asked him this question. So now Krishna's answering this question, and he takes a good 15 texts to do this, and he answers it part by part. And today we are entering into the part where Krishna is answering how a perfected yogi, like a self-realized person, engages their senses. So that's where we are today. We're starting with chapter 2, text 64. I'll share my screen and we'll get right into it. Chapter 2, text 64. But a person free from all attachment and aversion and able to control his senses through regulative principles of freedom can obtain the complete mercy of the Lord. So for 64 through 71, again, Krishna is going to share how a perfected yogi engages their senses. And the premise here is that while moving around in this world, how does one engage their senses in a way that's in harmony with the world and not destructive to themselves or others, right? In a way that's harmonious with our nature, with the living beings around us, with divinity. How does a person engage their senses in a way that's harmonious and not destructive? Because we spent last week, we talked a lot about how we can engage our senses and how it can be pretty destructive to us or to other people. We talked about the cycle of self-destruction. We talked about following our senses too much in a way that starts to degrade our lives, right? And what we can do about that. So now it's saying, okay, we know we don't want to do that. We know that there's a lot of danger there, and we have to we have to be prepared for that our senses are going to lead us astray. So how do we actually engage our senses in a way that's harmonious? Because within the self, there's things that we like and we dislike, right? The self being the soul, the mind, and the senses. And these things can be thought of like programming within us. Like these impressions are like programming within us. Like a computer is programmed to behave a certain way. The same thing happens to us, right? Because we are conditioned beings. So a lot of times we're just acting out of like default of just our past conditioning and our past responses. We're just carrying that over and acting like that, almost like we're programmed. You know, we talked about this before too. Like if you're a child and you develop some unhealthy survival mechanism that is then going to trickle over into your future relationships because you've kind of developed a habit of acting and responding like this. And in that way, you've kind of programmed yourself based off of your past experiences. This is the conditioning, the impressions that we accumulate as we go through this life. And impressions that we've accumulated as we've gone through our past lives that then impact how we show up in the future moments. And this is how we become like we're programmed, like computers are programmed by a programmer. So when we function, we encounter things that we like and things that we dislike naturally. And we want to move towards things that we like, and we want to move away from things that we don't like. And so the scripture saying here is that we have to self-regulate, guided by rules and principles that are in the wisdom texts. Right? And this is the purpose of the rules and the wisdom that are in the wisdom text. You know, I remember when I was in college, I was always really drawn to like church groups. And there was this church group that they had a party and they had red Solo cups. And they were so particular about the red Solo cups. They were like drinking alcohol out of the red Solo cups, but they didn't want people to know that they were drinking alcohol out of the red Solo cups. So they made sure to like that nobody took a picture with a red Solo cup. And they were like so intense about it. And I remember being so turned off because it was like, okay, if you're going to drink alcohol, but like, what's the point of acting like you're holier than thou if like, you know, it was like these kinds of things like drove me crazy when I was a kid and like, it prevented me from really being able to give my heart to an organization or like a organized religion or something like that. The same thing happened with like living with somebody before you're married. I remember that too. Like my friends would be like, oh, nobody can find out. Nobody can find out. I'm like, that's the stupidest thing ever. I was like a rebel. I'd be like, well, I'm going to do it and I'm going to advertise it everywhere. Like, but anyway, that's not the point of these rules. And that's what's so beautiful, I think, when you get to a point where you really try to connect with the essence of these practices, is the point of these rules is not to restrict us, right? And the point is absolutely not to like, you know, for an external reason so that we can look like we're something we're not, right? That's really just kind of a elementary understanding of what's actually going on and an elementary application, right? When we really understand what we're doing here and why we're doing it, we understand that these rules can actually give us freedom, right? These rules can actually give us freedom, and that's what it says in this verse. Able to control his senses through regulative principles of freedom. Because that's the purpose of the rules. They're not meant to restrict us. They're meant to give us freedom. And when we're limited, sometimes when we're limited in any way, we see that this limitation as a restriction to our freedom. And that can happen. That can happen. But that's not what the Gita is talking about here. Some limits protect, right? Like if a person has been unfairly jailed, then the jail walls restrict their freedom of movement. But if a person is living inside a fort that's being attacked by outside rioters who want to kill that person, the walls protect the person's movement, right? They're offering protection. They're not imposing restriction. And if that person foolishly leaves the fort, then they could be in trouble. So for physical threats, it's easy to discern. This is obvious to us. But for subtler threats to the consciousness by temptations, it's a little bit more difficult, right? We need intelligence. And that's what the Gita gives us, is intelligence, so that we can discern between what's a threat, what can make us vulnerable, and what's not, and how much, right? And when we're told not to do some activities that we consider pleasurable, we tend to rebel, right? That we don't like that. We're like, and this is, I think, where I was when I saw the church group. Like, no, you guys obviously like that. You're having fun. So why act like you're not? Like this is such a joke, right? Not really realizing that what we consider pleasurable, it may taste like nectar at the beginning, but it can oftentimes end up tasting like poison at the end. And that's something when we talk about the cycle of self-destruction, we talked about last week, that we've all encountered. Something that tasted like nectar at the beginning, but then soon turns into poison, and it starts to self-destruct. We start to self-destruct. It starts to degrade us. You know, whether it's a substance whether it's an unhealthy relationship, whatever your drug of choice is, to self-soothe, to distract you from the pain of material existence, or to fill that void, right, that God-shaped hole in your heart, it will eventually, if you're using it in that way, to that degree, it will eventually degrade us. It will be the cause of our demise. So we have to be careful. And the Gita encourages us to keep our search for happiness within scriptural limits. This is the purpose of the scriptural limits. It's not to, rub it in somebody else's face that I'm holier than thou, or create some kind of club around it so that these people, are so self-controlled and together and these people aren't, right? It's like, that's again, an elementary understanding of what's actually happening here. But it's to protect ourselves, to protect our consciousness, because we want to use our consciousness to connect to something higher. And we recognize that if our consciousness is pulled away, it's being pulled away from God. That's what it is, right? That's what sin actually means. It's separate from God. We're turning away from God. It's not like, oh, you're so bad. You're a bad person because you did that. No, it's you're creating distance between you and God. You're separating from God, and that's hurtful to ourselves, right? That's not what we want to do. That's not our goal here as spiritualists. So living within spiritual limits is the ultimate sign of intelligence, as it protects us from degradation and it guides us towards liberation. And that's what this verse is saying. One will be able to have purposeful engagement that will lead us to this contentment. So in practicality, this can be difficult because we've relied on our crutches for so long to fill that God-shaped hole, to give us some kind of nourishment or love that we feel that we need, that we haven't yet really reached out to spirit for yet, right? So if we have this discomfort, and all of us have, I've talked a lot about my codependency and being in toxic relationships. And I remember after like the third one being like, okay, there's a common denominator here, and it's me, right? That realization that it's like, okay, maybe, there could be things wrong with other people, but I'm the one that keeps ending up in the same situation. So it's recognizing that, right? And in that, what I did when I realized that was put a fast to relationships. Like, okay, I can't keep reaching out to the relationships to fill some kind of void in myself, because they keep ending up toxic. So in that, it's like there's a lot of discomfort, when we're fasting from these things, or when we're in this kind of stage where we can't reach to what we're used to reaching to for comfort, because we know that it's not serving us. And what we need to do is start cultivating an alternative source of comfort, right? And this is actually when I started getting into spiritual life. So I started kind of developing that, but it's really uncomfortable, right? There's definitely resistance. It's like really uncomfortable. I remember it's like difficult. It was difficult not to get on those dating apps. It's just like the silliest thing to think about now, but it was, I did it for almost a year maybe. And it was like, it was hard. But we have to get comfortable with that. We have to get comfortable being a little bit uncomfortable, knowing that in-between stage is a natural occurrence and not a personal weakness, and surrounding ourselves with the resources to upgrade our consciousness, right? The spiritual association, people that are like-minded, that are going for the same things, filling your schedule up with, and it doesn't even have to, if you can just make one decision better, if you can just, I remember going to the gym more. That was another thing I did more. And it's like, just make a couple decisions better, and try to get off whatever this drug of choice situation is. So that was my experience with this. Narayani says, I was thinking about those regulations recently, and later in 6:17, Krishna speaks not only of regulation of sleeping and eating, but also recreation and work. We even should have time for rest and restore. Oh yeah, that's such a nice point. And we'll get into these regulations more and more and what they are. And but yeah, the regulations of sleeping and eating, also recreation and work. Yeah, we really have to be careful with everything because, to be honest with you, I talk about going to the gym, but there was a time in my life that I was overboard at the gym, right? And it was like it was an addiction of its own. So we really have to be careful. But the beautiful thing about spiritual lives is it gives us the North Star, the where we're going, and then it gives us the how to get there. And then the more sincere that we can get in that practice, the easier these other things become. We don't have to worry so much about getting pulled off by some of these, fake happinesses or happinesses that are only going to be temporary or that are actually may cause us more pain or destruction in the end, because our consciousness, we're operating at a higher level of consciousness. Thank you for that, Narayani. Does anybody else want to share any experience with that? Or any reflection or realization? Trevor, please share. I can always count on Trevor to break the ice.
Sorry, I need to staple my lips shut sometimes.
No, it's great because as soon as you go, then other hands come up. So it's great.
I did notice that. But I really love what you said about the protection. It's there to help you, It's not there to say you do this and you don't do that or else you don't qualify. It's more like it's there for you, it's to help you to gain liberation, not restrict you. It's there to protect you. I really, really like what you said right there. That was powerful. I also want to throw the tip in there. Again, we've talked about it before. Mariah talked about how to engage your senses in transcendental service. There's different forms of it, 9 different forms, chanting, the physical yoga even helps, the pranayama, the scriptures, the group association, like you mentioned, what we're doing now. It feels very subtle when you're engaged in it, but it's easy to tell that you feel a lot better when it's happening, and you feel a lot different in a better way whenever we disengage, whenever we shut the phones off. It's like I feel a hell of a lot better than whenever I first started. So it's about increasing that activity to strengthen your spirit and making that your main focus. Basically, is my best tip, is to make your primary focus to increase that spiritual energy. And then as a byproduct, the vices lose their grip on you, and naturally you'll be letting go of things as your vibration rises. You naturally lose interest in other things that kind of anchor you down to a lower vibration. So
yeah,
if you are engaged in some sort of addiction that you're struggling with, don't beat yourself up about it. Give yourself time to gain strength and keep trying to increase these different forms of meditation. They all go hand in hand. You can either be really attracted to one. That's one thing that you don't really have to regulate. I mean, you can do too much of something if you're neglecting your material life. We still have duties to engage in, but you can't do too much japa. You can't do too much scriptures and whatnot. That's only going to increase your capacity and make you stronger and better. But naturally, as our vibration rises, we naturally want to do whatever it takes to hang on to that higher vibration at a consistency. So
yeah,
for me,
and I love.
Go ahead.
I love how you said that some of these regulations or restrictions we might not be quite ready yet for. And that's also okay. We could practice them wherever we're at. We can, some of them maybe are a little bit high for where we are right now. Maybe we're not quite there. But still we could do something. We can make some little small incremental improvement in our life and believe and in that way kind of build faith in the process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me, I was little party animal for a little bit. And whenever I started engaging in this stuff, my vibration got so high that I just had this terrible time every time I try to go out and drink, try to do what I used to do to have fun. It just didn't even work out when I wanted. It's like I entered this new reality, and it's like, wow, I couldn't even do what I used to do if I tried. It was
Yeah.
really, it was fascinating, but I also noticed that it just created more work for me to get back up onto that higher vibration and transcendental platform. So I was like, nah, I'm not going to do that anymore. So it's kind of like a natural secondary goal. Don't make it your primary focus. It is important, make an effort to let go of things, but our primary focus is to increase the Krishna in our life, increase the spiritual energy, raise our
For
vibration.
sure. Yeah, that's the best way. That's the best way. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Does anybody else want to share before we move on to 65? Okay, we'll move on to 65, and you guys can interrupt at any time too. 65. For one thus satisfied in Krishna consciousness, the threefold miseries of material existence exist no longer. In such satisfied consciousness, one's intelligence is soon well established. So this one says, for one thus satisfied in Krishna consciousness, the threefold miseries of material existence exist no longer. Does anybody want to take a shot at what those threefold miseries are? Nitai. I'll just call out Nitai. You know these.
Yeah, it's Aditevik, Adibautik, and Adhyatmik.
Yeah, can you
The
define
series
them
of,
for us?
I think it is in, was it in,
So you can start with the first one. Oh, you're Googling, aren't you? You're Googling.
I don't know
no,
which
I'm
one goes
in
with
the
which.
verse, where the verse, can you find it, you said. I don't
Yeah.
know where this verse, so.
That's okay. So it's the miseries caused by our bodies. This is one
Okay.
misery. So Sastra tells us that there's three miseries that are caused in this material existence. And this is what's so beautiful about Sastra is it breaks down again what we're going through in this material existence. It's like a map, like a handbook. Like this is what you're going to experience. We've talked about this. So you're going to experience these three miseries. One is miseries that arise from the mind and body. One is miseries inflicted from other living beings, right? And the other is miseries arising from natural catastrophes that we have no control over, right? Like hurricanes or things of that nature. So these are the threefold miseries that we're gonna experience in material existence. And Krishna tells us this when we're put in here. Okay, this is what it's gonna look like. And naturally, some of these we're gonna like, and some of these we're gonna dislike. I mean, it doesn't sound like any of them will like, but we'll have varying degrees of aversion and attachment for whatever reason. And if we can put away our likes and dislikes, we can progress purposely and get some level of contentment. So if we can try to kind of lessen that grip, we get so anxious sometimes over how is this person going to respond to me? What are they going to think of me? Or miseries from our mind and body. Some of us are dealing with some pretty severe miseries from our mind and body. And if we can get less wrapped up in those, if we can get less wrapped up in the narratives, in what the sensations that we're experiencing, if we can just kind of lessen that, if we can put that away a little bit, we can progress purposefully in spiritual life, and we can get some kind of contentment. Like the distress becomes a little bit more bearable. Like if we're in a good mood and we get cut off in traffic, we'll be okay because we have a steady cheerfulness independent of externals. Right? Like that's the ultimate goal. That's where we want to get to. And that can happen for us. Right? If in this practice, this can happen to us in this lifetime. We can learn how to put these things in perspective and just kind of like minimize those pop-up windows that are constantly coming up in our peripheral, right? We can minimize them. They're still there. We're not like blocking them out, but we're just putting less into them. And after this, the intelligence becomes steady and we can become firmly situated. Right? The waves of happiness and distress that we have going up and down, we've talked about the waves of the happiness and distress. If we draw a line through those waves, we have a mean, like an average. Right? If we draw a line, just a straight line through the waves of happiness and distress. But what happens is, if we can practice this, is that the mean average of the happiness and distress is going up. So our average happiness is going up. So those waves are still there. We can't get rid of the waves altogether, but they're sloping upwards now because our overall happiness is going upwards because we're becoming more connected and nourished and therefore more fulfilled through that connection. And that's what happens when we grow spiritually. Our overall state of happiness becomes higher. Even when bad things happen, it doesn't get us down so much. We're still experiencing happiness and distress. We can't get rid of it completely. But if we can develop and cultivate this spiritual connection, our overall level of happiness can get higher. And therefore, we're less impacted by these little waves that we're experiencing in our day-to-day, caused by these three miseries to the body, caused by our mind and our bodies, caused by other living creatures, and then caused by just natural disasters that happen around us that we have no control over. We see this in our lives, like in children, like if a child's parents get divorced, for example, or, there's some problem at home, the child is likely to, their grades may go down, or they may not perform as well in their sports, or because their family unit is the source of their stability in life. This is just child psychology, right? They start like that family unit is so important because that's their stability. And this can make us question, what are we taking shelter in? What's our stability in life? Because what we want to take shelter in is divinity, right? As we mature and as our relationship with divinity matures and as we get older, we see that it's really the only stable thing in this world that we can take shelter of. And this is what we want to do, so that if a rug is pulled out from underneath of us, if we lose a job, or we lose a relationship, or whatever else we lose, if we lose some kind of function of our body, what are we really taking shelter in? And if we're taking shelter in divinity, it's not going to shake us so much. Right. And sometimes God will test us. Sometimes he'll pull something out from underneath of us. We'll lose a job or relationship, and it will be a test. It'll be a question for our faith. It'll be confronting. Okay, where are you? What are you really taking shelter of? How much are you taking shelter of this thing? How much are you taking shelter of this material identification, such that when I pull it out from underneath of you, it completely rocks you? Right. And this doesn't mean that we're not going to be bothered. Of course, we're going to be bothered. There may be some grieving. These things are difficult, these transitions, these material transitions, but they shouldn't completely, dismantle us. And that's what we're doing here. That's why we're doing this, is to develop that strong, stable relationship. We know who we are, right? We're a soul, we're a spirit soul, we're connected to divinity. We know what we're doing here, right? We're trying to regain that connection. And when these material disturbances come, they're just like, again, little waves in the ocean. They're not rocking us such that we're falling out of the boat. And that's what we're doing here. That's the goal. If we can accomplish this, we can become relatively unshaken when things don't go our way, because we know who we are and we take refuge in that ultimate relationship. We see the bigger picture. And this happens when our main source of stability and emotional support comes from that relationship with God. And that can happen to each and every one of us in this lifetime if we progress in this practice, if we continue, waking up, engaging in this sangha together, having uplifting association, spending time in meditation and prayer. You know, it's a relationship just like any other relationship that we have. We have to put effort into it. You know, we have to endeavor. But in that endeavor, we will experience that reciprocation. It's guaranteed if we're endeavoring sincerely. So that's what we're doing here. And this point, it's not to say, you know, don't take shelter in your family, because that's also, that's healthy. You know, we need, that was actually, I remember when I got into spiritual life and I started seeing all these family structures, I was like, I probably was never really like, I didn't know if I was going to get married or not. I was like, yeah, but it actually is really good for your mind. You know, we need that stability, and that's important, but we need that stability so that we can cultivate spiritual connection, so that our minds can be peaceful, so that we don't have constant anxieties about our material existence, so that we can cultivate that. Not that it's the end goal. You know, it's not like, okay, I'm going to get married and have kids and then just be happy. No, that's a nice foundation. That's a nice base. And we want to, you know, take care of that. We want to maintain that, and we want to reciprocate with that. And this is healthy. But at the same time, we want to know even the purpose of that in the context of life, right? The purpose of that is to create this container so that we can pursue spiritual life together. Because ultimately, that's the only stability any of us have in this world. Right. And that's what the Gita is telling us. What do you guys think of that?
I think it's wonderful. And I'm going to take it a step, like probably further than any of us might ever attain in this life. But, you know, when I think about people who have overcome these material miseries, and there's so many examples within our scriptures. And then, you know, the biggest example is like Jesus, and how, you know, I mean, he was literally being beaten and dragged through the street, and he was still just saying, like, you know, forgive them, because he knew, and he was so in touch with his spiritual self, and he was so in touch with God that it didn't affect him, not like it would affect us, you know. And there's so many saints even within Vedic scriptures, like Haridas Thakur. He was a great devotee during Lord Chaitanya's time 500 years ago. And again, he was another one who was taken through, you know, multiple streets and just like beaten because he was chanting Hare Krishna, and he just kept chanting. And it got to the point where the people who were beating him were exhausted, and he saw that. And so he stopped. He pretended to be dead. He was so in control of his senses and his body. He was able to fake his death and stop his breathing, I should say, to where, just to have mercy on the people who are beating him. You know, I mean, these are obviously very exalted personalities, but it just shows that, like, you know, we don't have to be as affected by these material pains. And when we're truly in touch and in that connection with the Supreme Lord, with God, with our spiritual self, you know, we're not going to be as affected. And, you know, we can get to that point also, to where it's like, you know, not saying we should go and like become beaten, but like, you know, it's to that point where you could become beaten and you don't feel it, because you're just so identifying with your spiritual self and not this material body. And it's just amazing, you know. But yeah. I just find that.
No, that was beautiful. And I love those examples. And Sastra, you're right, they're littered all over Sastra, these examples of these high personalities who have achieved this. And I love what you said too. It's not something that, I mean, that's again a gold standard. And that's a pretty high exalted standard. But the principle is the same, that in our own lives, you know, we may be practicing it on the level of how much can we, you know, really control our internal steadiness, our internal peaceful state of mind when we get cut off in traffic, you know, or when something at work doesn't go our way, or when our ego is bruised. You know, how can we kind of, how fast, what kind of recovery can we make? You know, how can we bounce back? How can we maintain that internal steadiness? And it's
Yeah.
not something that can be faked either. It's not something that, again, it's not just like blocking out or numbing out. We have to be where we are, and we have to own it. That's the only way we're really going to make progress. So it's okay if you're not there yet. It's okay if you're yelling at the guy who just cut you off. That's okay. But know that something more exists for you. And let's aspire to that together,
Yeah.
because we're all there. We all that happens to us all. But let's try to get better this lifetime. Let's try to upgrade that consciousness.
Yeah, and I think that just comes from like recognizing it in the moment. Okay, I'm being disturbed by whatever. Okay, how can I take more shelter? Like that's been like my motto lately. Like, all right, I'm being disturbed. Let me feel this, acknowledge it. Okay, now how can I take more shelter of, my spirituality of God? It's a practice. It's that in itself is a practice,
Yeah, and really zooming out and seeing it for what it is. It's like if you get cut off in traffic, what is that? Like 5 minutes, you're going to be upset. You're not even going to remember in a couple days. It's going to be like out. So really kind of changing that perspective to see that we're on a multi-life journey, evolution, spiritual evolution. So some of these things are just to test us. And how are we going to respond in that test? And these things that pop up, again, are they really going to impact us in 5 minutes, tomorrow, next week, in a month? And in that way, how quickly can we release them so that they don't? Yeah, thank you, Mariah.
Thank you.
Nild, please share with us.
Thank you. Well, a couple things, when I get cut off or whatever, at least half the time I pray for the other person and hope that they're not, rushing to bring their mother to the hospital. That there's something that's going on for them that maybe isn't that positive. But a couple of weeks ago, and I don't think I mentioned this in this group, but I had the privilege of going to Sedona, and right before I went there, I had severe some damage to my knee, and I had plantar fasciitis, so my heel was great pain, and I was so disappointed because I wasn't going to be able to take the 6 mile walks up to the vortexes and the vistas, and like, how terrible is this? And we got together with a Native American spiritual guide. She showed us all these walks that were like 50 yards, or maybe it was 2 miles, to these places that were just amazing. And so when I went into it with this negativity, and yet that was flipped, and so all my worrying and concerns were kind of blocked, were put aside, and I got to meditate on the rocks in the vortexes of Sedona, and actually got into spiritual practice, and initially because I hurt my legs so badly and my back so badly I couldn't walk, and I was just laying there in the backyard looking up at the trees, and I read the Four Agreements, and that was kind of my introduction to the whole spiritual path. So it was a gift that I was not able to walk. It was really kind of wonderful. So yeah, so pray for those who cut you off.
Wow. It sounds like you've kind of mastered this art. And these are things, actually, the 3 things that you mentioned are things that I've learned from my spiritual teachers, from my Shiksha guru. I remember I was struggling with like forgiveness of somebody, and they said, okay, close your eyes and like picture yourself just like beating that person up. They said this to me. They're like, just picture yourself just like whatever you want to do. And then they said, okay, now picture their face as being your face. The premise being that, whatever we've done to somebody else is likely something that is coming back to us. That's why it's bothering us. If we feel betrayed, if we feel like somebody wronged us, a lot of times we're triggered because that very thing exists inside of us. And this is, again, just the way that these bodies work, that this mind works. And so a lot of times it's something we need to get over. And the other thing you said, the praying, that's when I was struggling with this. That's what Veda told me to do. You need to pray for this person, pray for this person. When you can really sincerely pray for this person, then it's resolved. And you'll notice how difficult that is, how much resistance comes up when you try to like pray for somebody that you really feel like has done you wrong. That's where you can really see where you are in this process of forgiveness. But if we can get there, if we can see that, I love what you said, even just in traffic. I tell my husband that all the time because he's a really good driver. My husband's a great driver and he has low tolerance for people that aren't. And I'm a terrible driver. So we'll be driving and someone will like, do something stupid and he'll get so upset. And I'm like, look, that is me all the time. Like, and my husband is so kind and compassionate with me that he wouldn't respond to that if it was me. But I'm like, listen, that's your wife right there. That is me. I do that. I did that yesterday to somebody. And it's the truth, it's like, and the last thing, the changing your perspective. That's something I've heard in a positive intelligence course. Like if we're carrying negativity from the past moment into the next moment, then that next moment is just going to be negative. So it's really not even good for like obtaining material goals. We're going to show up to that next work meeting still pissed off from what happened to us 10 minutes ago. So yeah, these are such good techniques, and you seem like quite the master. Thank you for sharing that with us, Nild.
I still speed up when somebody's trying to pass me on the right. I'm not there. I'm not there yet.
Let's all share our this week in our WhatsApp chat. Next time, if somebody gets cut off in traffic, you have to share with us how you responded internally and externally. That's our homework this week. On the road, we have to share. We have this group chat now for that's fun. Hopefully we'll start using it, and we just set this up last week. It's just on WhatsApp. It's another group chat that we can share. We can continue sharing throughout the week our experiences with some of these principles that we're trying to practice and get better at. So Tom's on the thread says conscious mindfulness with compassion and understanding of others and self, all the while maintaining faith. Yes, that's a nice summary there. Nitai says, laugh out loud, I'll share from experience in Mumbai traffic. Yes, great. Nitai's got like the ultimate challenge, Mumbai, India traffic. Okay, so let's go to this last one. We'll do one more. We'll do 266. Says, one who is connected with the Supreme in Krishna consciousness can have neither transcendental intelligence. One who is not connected with the Supreme can have neither transcendental intelligence nor a steady mind, without which there is no possibility of peace. And how can there be any happiness without peace? So Krishna is still answering here how the wise engage their senses. He's saying we need to be engaged physically and absorbed mentally to really be connected. If we're disconnected, disengaged, distracted, there's no intelligence for a person. If there's no steady mind, that the mind cannot be steady, there's no happiness, or there's no peace. And if there's no peace, there can be no happiness. Right? No peace means no joy. It's like if somebody says something hurtful to us, just when we're sitting down to eat, a Thanksgiving meal, and we don't even really taste it, like that, we're not even really hungry because the mind is so disturbed. There's no joy. If we can't have a peaceful mind, there's no joy. And so that's what the Gita's saying here. There's no steady mind, there's no peace, and in that there can be no joy. from 62 to 63, what we talked about last Thursday, is the trajectory of what can happen if we become disconnected. If we lose that connection, how quickly our mind can look for pleasure, because remember, we're pleasure-seeking creatures. We're programmed, we desire, that's natural. If we're disconnected from source, from divinity, and we're not plugged in there getting joy and happiness from that relationship, our mind's going to look elsewhere. We're going to look to these senses around us to give us enjoyment, and we're going to run to those, and from there, that's what we talked about last week. That can be really degrading to us. And we talked about that. In 62 and 63, we talked about the trajectory of what can happen if we become disconnected. So now 64, 65, what we talked to 2 verses before this, talked about how meaningful engagement can connect to self, right? So if we're meaningfully engaged, we can connect to self. If we aren't meaningfully engaged, we could become disconnected and we lose our functioning intelligence. And this is oftentimes, we see this like people that if you're not busy, like if you don't have a lot going on, oftentimes worry time corresponds to no work time. Like if you're just, that's when the anxiety sets in, right? If we're just sitting on the couch by ourselves with nothing to do, all of a sudden we're worried, we're in anxiety. And where that anxiety can take us, or what band-aid we look for, that could be dangerous. So we want to have meaningful engagement. And this is what the Gita teaches us, right? And this meaningful engagement is through service to divinity. That's our goal here. That's what will keep us connected. We have finite time and we're fallible, so we must have this meaningful engagement. This is important for our spiritual lives. Let's see what's going on in the chat over here. I love the 4 agreements. Miguel Ruiz is amazing. Glad someone else knows his books. What are the 4 agreements? Somebody share with us what the 4 agreements are. The chat is going crazy about the 4 agreements. Did we talk about these?
It's a book written by someone from South America, I believe. And I forget what all 4 of them are. Someone else might remember better than me.
Be impeccable with your word. Don't take anything personally. Don't make assumptions, and always do your best.
Be impeccable with your word. Don't take anything personally. Don't make assumptions, and always do your best. Those are nice.
He starts out talking about how, when we're children, and you've talked about this, and we've talked about this, that you're innocent, you're kind of pure, and then everybody dumps all this stuff on you about how you're supposed to be. Don't cry, don't so many things and then so we want to abide by them, forced to, and then he goes into the 4 agreements and why they're, we make assumptions all the time. Like that guy who just cut me off is a jerk. He's trying to speed for no purpose, and yet he may indeed be going to get his child from the hospital, or whatever the case might be. So when we make assumptions, somebody says something to us, or we can assume somebody, like with my sister, I assumed that she didn't really want to come visit me. She would drive up to Connecticut from New York to go to her soccer match with her son. Well, it was really that she didn't feel comfortable driving, really, and she was forcing herself to even get as far as she was going. Also, she had some issues with my former wife that she really didn't want to visit her. I was making assumptions. Sorry, it's a really good. It's relatively short, so you can spin through it quickly.
Wow. And it's called the 4 agreements. So be impeccable with your words. Don't make assumptions. What were the other 2? Oh, you're on mute, Neld.
do the best you can.
Do the best you can
And don't take anything personally.
and don't take anything personally. Wow. Yeah, if we could really all practice those in these kinds of situations, what a difference it could make for for upgrading our consciousness, for getting over some of these small road bumps that we encounter that can quickly pull us off track in our spiritual quest. And those are nice. Thank you. Trevor, do you want to share something with us?
Yeah, I also wanted to bring up the point that the adversities, the lessons, the challenges, they don't really end like you were talking about previously, because the difference between material happiness and qualities, or more so defects, and the spiritual or eternal qualities, is there's no limits to the transcendental bliss. There's no limits to spiritual qualities that we're manifesting. So you'll never stop acute. It's not like you cultivate gratitude. It's like, okay, I'm grateful now. I'm done learning that lesson. There's no limits to it. You can never be too grateful. That accumulation is an eternal process. Same thing with all the other qualities like surrendering. There is never an end to that. You can never surrender too much. So there will always be challenges that push you even further into that deeper state. And as you're leveling up, your challenges level up too. So don't beat yourself up if you're still facing the same or similar lessons, because it's never it doesn't really end. It's more so the devotee, as you develop and your consciousness matures, you end up developing gratitude for the adversity, even in a more instant note, because you know why it's there. You can feel what it's doing to you inside, and you're able to see the soul purification process through the circumstances of your life. You're more focused on your
Yeah.
inner situation.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful way to kind of encapsulate all of this, is if we could go through our material existence and see things in that light. Like everything, all the ups and downs that we're experiencing are really just tests for us to see how can we refine ourselves? How
Yeah.
can we become more surrendered, more compassionate, more loving? And if we're seeing the same thing pop up again and again, it's because we need it. It's because Krishna's giving that to us as a gift so that we can continue working on these things and refining and upgrading and pruning ourselves. That's what we're doing here. So if we
Yeah,
can see the things, situations in this light, it can help us to get the perseverance to overcome and to grow.
yes, at the Kirtan Center, as I was talking about all the adversity, how it's been pretty uh equally distributed. I noticed a lot of people were going through a lot of stuff, but then I like, as you're able to see these things, you're able to be grateful for it when it's happening, or it might take a second afterwards. Some stuff is pretty intense, but I'm like, if we weren't going through these challenges, we wouldn't all be here today. The adversities are more important than everything going smooth sailing for you. And then Mike said something really wise to me. He said, yeah, if we were all having a good time here, we wouldn't want to leave. We would want to remain in this material existence. I'm like, that's a very good point.
Yeah, there's great souls in Sastra who have prayed for calamities, because it's in those calamities that they really reach out and seek shelter of divinity. And without those, if life is too good, like it is in the higher planets, or even the lower planetary systems, life is even more opulent, then we don't have that need. We don't feel called to reach out, and ultimately that's what will make our heart most connected and happy. So if we could really start to see things in that light and shift our perspective, it's not about me and having a good time and getting all my desires fulfilled. No, that's the ego. It's about our connection with divinity and trusting that the things in our life is custom made for me. The things that I'm encountering today, tomorrow, next week, next year, it's custom designed for me to refine, for me to upgrade, for me to get closer in that spiritual connection and take more shelter of divinity. It's beautiful. Thank you. Katie, please share with us.
Hi, Haribo.
Right.
Yeah, I'm thinking of a few like real glaring examples. Glaring examples. Um, so sometimes for me, like I'm really, really, let's say it, good instead of bad, good at staying in situations that are like there's clear signs to move away, especially with work when there's like injustices and stuff like that. And so it just made me think of some of these examples like um Krishna is so amazing at causing a calamity that yes has difficulties, but then later you're like, oh my god, that I wouldn't have left that situation.
Mm.
So like I have a old foot injury from when I was a little child, and it's kind of a difficulty, or comes back in bigger and smaller ways. And in September 2019, I re-broke it, and then couldn't go to work, which was a place I really needed to stop working. And so I like had the boot, and I saw this kirtan online and kind of hobbled across the neighborhood. And that's how I met the devotees. I mean, it's just amazing. Like and that's not the first time Krishna broke my foot to get me out of somewhere, and get me into somewhere else. And I'm so blessed. I mean, the person I met was Har Kirtan Das. I mean, it's just incredible. And then I was thinking of another example, in a different thing we were talking about trying to have that perspective, and not like carry anger. Like, yes, it's valid and useful to feel our feelings and have try to learn from them. So for example, last week I was going to this work birthday gathering, and I didn't think, I thought, oh, people left before me, they'll surely be there. It didn't even cross my mind that like it wasn't really starting yet. And we've been working on trying to form a union at work, and it's going terribly. Like, we work for one of the richest guys in the country, and it's the union busting is going very well. you know and basically I showed up, and there were just two people there, and one person is really against it, but is just in the union by default because she's also an hourly worker. And so I kind of thought, oh man, like, often at work I carry around this, like, I am angry at this person fundamentally because they do wrong things all the time, kind of vibe. And I'm just been trying to let go of that. And I guess my point is, like, there's real benefits to myself and my spiritual practice and the ripples that come from how I interact with people. So, I went into the place, and it was just these two people. And I was thinking, oh God, oh boy, we're clearly not very close. We don't interact a lot. We both know our stance on stuff. But I thought, I just was like, nope. And I just walked up and was friendly. I was like, we're not doing that. This is a social thing, and I just approached it with a lot of like kindness in this moment. I don't know her backstory. I don't know why she's against the union. You know what I mean? And it was so beneficial to myself. So it feels a little selfish, but then it made me think about how that ripples out, I mean, and we were the first three people there. So like it could have set a really bad tone for the poor guy whose birthday it is, and yeah, I think part of my point is like, the more we show up for this kind of sangha and learning and reminders, the more we can experience it in our life, and in our experience with being happy or more distressed more consistently. And then just the other day at work, one of the ladies was like, you look different. What, you look different, like, is it your hair, like, and I was thinking, like, it wasn't really the setting to go into a whole big explanation, but I was thinking, I think this is because I look less bothered, like less constrained by like consistent anger, because I'm trying to only use that in the moments where it's like not, where it's useful, not let it invade, like keep going and
Right.
invade my whole
Right.
life. Like I don't need to be mad at my terrible bosses like every moment of my day. Like that really sets me up to be not rippling out a better, um, more positive continuation of progress, I guess, right?
Yeah.
So that I'm not sure if that was so well explained, but it just made me think of those examples. And
No,
it's
that's
just neat. It's neat how we can see, like eventually, we really notice like this stuff works. It really works. And then I guess the last example was just even like yesterday, I realized I usually watch like these spooky stories at my break sometimes, but instead at work. But instead, I've started doing like a couple more rounds, which was good advice from
wow.
you, honestly. And I thought, wow, I haven't watched one of those stories. Like, where did that go? And it was just an example of something falling away
Yeah.
that we don't need. And it when we start to replace it more with our bhakti practices. So it's so amazing. So thanks. I just want to share that.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. And I could relate so much for those of us that are like have this pit bull mentality that are like determined beyond all get out. It's like,
Yeah.
let's just redirect that determination and that, you know, like um intensity to
Mm,
something that serves our higher purpose and not something that doesn't. I could think that before spiritual life, like the things I used to get attached to and not let go of. Again, relationships. The 5-year relationship is a complete waste of my time. What am I doing here? Thank you. Thanks for sharing.
thank you.
Mariah, you want to take us home here?
Yeah. I was just going to share, after you and Trevor were sharing, what came to my mind is there's a quote called, I forget who it's by exactly, but it says, "Blessed are the cracked, for they shall let in the light." And I just think that like encompasses so much of this. It's like, when we really take to those spiritual practices, when we're in those moments of being torn down, it's an opportunity to like to awaken our light, our soul, so it can come through. And I've always loved that quote. I remember like hearing that quote. I must have been like a teenager, I don't know, in my like almost 20, somewhere around there. But and then another thing that kept coming up for me this whole conversation was like, like Nild was saying, giving people the benefit of the doubt, especially in traffic. And I've always been taught give the benefit of the doubt. But just like you guys were saying, then we become overly tolerant of our situations to where we're like, okay, well, I'm just going to stay stuck here. But what else came up for me after you shared, Katie, is like, as we let go of like holding on to like needing these situations to be a certain way, and we pour more into our spiritual practice, then Krishna creates the situation to where it's so obvious to make the change. And I just think that's so beautiful, because it's again just taking us deeper in that level of surrender, rather than like overly being tolerant of a bad situation, but also like changing the situation ourselves to where we just go into another bad situation. It's really like putting it into a different practice that's like in between. Okay, I have to change it or I have to tolerate it. You give it up to the Lord, and then like he just changes it, and then sometimes it's by a calamity, which turns into a blessing. And yeah, so those are just some of the things that came to me today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and just because we're releasing it and we're deciding not to get so engaged, it doesn't mean that we're accepting it. We may see that, okay, this situation or these people no longer even serve my higher calling, and maybe it's better to have some space there.
Yeah.
Something of that nature. Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you all. Okay, so in the chat this week, our group chat, as we're encountering these ups and downs of material distress, let's communicate on how it's going for us. What if we're able to put this into a larger context to see how this is part of God's plan to purify me and bring me closer to Him and increase my level of surrender and compassion, and how we're doing on those tests. Yeah. Okay, this will be fun. If you're not in the group chat, if you go to Seeker's Quest, if you go to Instagram Seeker's Quest and you get on the Seeker's Quest thread, you can do this through the link tree in the bio on our Instagram account. Then in that, pinned in that WhatsApp chat is another chat that you can get in where everybody can share together. And that's what I'm talking about when I say that, because we're going to hold each other accountable throughout the week. We're going to connect and we're going to keep uplifting each other in between these sessions. So thank you all for coming. We had a long one today. Thank you all for sharing, and I will see you all on Thursday.
Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.